All right, welcome everybody. This is the Academy Chat from the National Association of Academies of Science for May 17th, 2024. I have an intro slide if I can figure out how to share it. You will see that. There's my intro slide. Okay. Actually, Sarah Hall is not with us today from Virginia, but this is the original graphic. I'm Amanda Fuller. I'm the past president of the National Association of Academies of Science. So glad to host this session and a bunch of the other ones that we have lined up for you. Since we are a smaller group today, I would love to go around and get introductions from all of you too. So we'll do that in just a second. And while I have my slide deck up here, I just want to invite you all and let you know that we have these programs are going to be every month in 2024. So the Academies of Science are, trying to foster a lot of learning among our community, among our leaders, and we do that in a few different ways, but these sessions are really great for people to share information with each other, share best practices, so that we can all be better at what we do. So we have scheduled out in June a session about the junior academies, which a lot of academies have as part of their programming. In July, August, and September, we have a 3-part series on board leadership and governance. So if you're part of an Academy of Science, I would really encourage you to pop into some of those. In October, we'll hopefully hear from Sigma Xi. We just inked an MOU with them, and we'll look forward to hearing from them about what they do and how that partnership is working between NAAS and Sigma Xi. In November, we're going to hear from folks at AAAS about the STEM Opportunity Alliance. A lot of you have heard about that initiative. It's very broad and it's very exciting, and we're excited to hear about that in November. And then in December, we're going to do a session about annual meetings, because almost all academies have an annual meeting, and we love to share information back and forth about how we do those. So tune in. You'll get that schedule in your newsletter and on our website and different communications on the social media and so on. So excited to bring you those. I am going to ask people to go around and introduce really quick, and I'll start with Hallie. Hallie's one of our admins for the NAS and helps put this together. So she's not taking a bite of her lunch at the moment and can say hi.
Thanks for giving me enough time. Okay, Hallie Thompson. I am in Missouri and affiliated with a number of different organizations, but most relevant right now is NAAS. I do a lot of admin support, but then the Most Policy Initiative. I'm one of the original co-founders, and I still do some work with them, helping with fundraising and other operational support. I'm actually sitting in the office in downtown Jefferson City right now and excited to talk with you all about science policy. Do you want me to kick it over to
Yeah,
Sarah?
just kick it to the next person. We can just pass it around.
Thanks, Hallie. I'm Sarah Brady. I'm the interim CEO at the California Council on Science and Technology. So happy to chat with you a little bit more about that today. Thank you. Paul, can I pass to you?
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, I'm Paul Doss. I'm past president of the Indiana Academy of Science and currently serve as the director of our Inspect Indiana Science Policy program for the state of Indiana and the Academy.
Great, and let's pass it to Dan next, is the next up on my screen.
There you go.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I'm eating lunch, so I have my camera off. But, I'm Dan Pomeroy. I'm the co-director of the Scientific Citizenship Initiative at Harvard, and we have a part-time summer fellowship for graduate students that I'm looking to expand to a full-time fellowship, and planning to apply to the NCLS planning grant. So, and I'll pass it to Bridget.
Hi, I'm Bridget Moran. I'm also part of the admin team for NAAS. I'm an independent contractor and I help with various scientific nonprofits in event management, science policy, and also program management. And I'm very excited to sit in on this. And I'll pass it over to Carrie.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Bridget. I'm Carrie Snavy-Burge. I'm from Nebraska. I have recently become involved in NAAS and glad to be here. I guess I can pass it to Kate Long.
Hi everyone, I'm also eating lunch, so camera's off, sorry. I am with the Institute for Science and Policy at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science here in Colorado. We are planning our STPF fellowship through the NCSL planning grant and hoping to have fellows by next year. So I'm really excited for this, thanks.
Excellent. Enjoy. Can you say hi?
Hi, I'm Joy Carnes from Pennsylvania Academy of Science. We don't do much with policy, so I'm just here to listen in and hear more about what everybody else is doing.
Excellent. So glad you could join us. Thank you, everybody. And yeah, just as Hallie mentioned earlier, we do keep these pretty informal. It is a chat. It is a, peer learning experience. And so I hope we'll have our presenters and then we'll have plenty of time for discussion and questions. And excited to have you all with us. So Paul or Sarah, did you all talk about who would be presenting first? Do you have a preference? Okay, heads shaking. Okay, then let's start with Paul from the Indiana Academy of Science. Paul, if you want to start us off and tell us about how the Indiana Academy of Science is involved and all about this awesome program.
Well, I'll do my best, and maybe if I could do two things at once, I'll pull my screen up here. And I'm going to take off on Joy's comment. A couple of years ago, Indiana wasn't doing much with policy either. In fact, a few years ago, Indiana Academy of Science wasn't doing anything with policy, but we are now. And I guess I'm here maybe to tell you about our program. But I'm at that stage in my career now where I'm also just going to try to encourage it. So hang on, I'm trying to see I can't see my screen. Can you guys?
Yep, it's beautiful.
Okay. I don't know what I would have called it beautiful. So yeah, I'm just going to try to take a few minutes and tell you about the INSPECT program, which kind of stands for Indiana Science Policy, Educate, Collaborate, Transform. The program is hosted by the Indiana Academy of Science. And while this program has been in the works for several years, we successfully launched last year with the placement of our first cohort of 3 fellows. And like I suggested, I'm at that point in my career where if I have a forum, I'm going to speak my mind a little bit. I've been trying to engage myself in the incorporation of sound science in policy essentially throughout my entire career, primarily at the federal level. And then I got nominated and elected president of the Indiana Academy of Science. And I didn't hide my agenda at all. I spotlighted it. And I feel very strongly that a state academy of science and its members need to be engaged. And obviously from a state academy perspective, that should be focused on the state. In our own disciplinary bubbles, we can be engaged at a national level, but I think a state academy should be engaged at the state. And I actually argue that a state academy, and Bob Marley here is my co-author, a state academy of science truly is in the best position to offer guidance and inform development of policy and the making of decisions at a state level. And in fact, I feel like a state academy should be obligated to do so. And I'm going to rely on a dead colleague of mine, T.C. Chamberlain, in 1907, during his remarks to the Illinois State Academy of Science, more than anything else, the intellectual and moral methods of science are a protection against current evils and a guarantee of safety in the future. I find those words perhaps even more relevant today. Chamberlain also suggested that the advocacy of the value of the spirit and method of science to the state and nation is essential in the solution of its social, political, and ethical problems. And so, you know, T.C. Chamberlain, I think he said it right well over a century ago. And I think that members and leaders in state academies should be continuing to kind of carry that mantle, if I may speak so directly. So the INSPECT program, Indiana Science Policy, is designed to allow current STEM graduate students to work side by side with state agency officials. So as I will tell you, we are focused on the executive branch of state government. We're not in the state house yet. We're not in the legislative branch. Hopefully, in the years to come, that might happen. But this is to work with state agencies, ultimately to promote, you know, long-term public and environmental health and economic growth and sustainability across the state of Indiana. This program was initially kind of gotten started up and running by an outstanding group of PhD students up at Notre Dame, including Robert Stanley, Morgan Munson, and others. They had initially designated this program SPIN to be Science Policy Indiana. And, you know, when I kind of came in and I did it with their blessing, I think that name kind of needed to go. I don't think you want to do anything with respect to policy and use the word spin. And so kind of generated this new name, INSPECT. But Robert and Morgan and the others, they did an outstanding job of kind of developing a foundation here, and freely admit that the basic structure of this fellowship program in Indiana was based upon the program that's been up and running in Virginia, the Coase Fellowship, for a few years. The fellows receive a stipend from their home institution. So that is the primary source of funding for this program, are our cooperating partner universities. And the stipend varies a little bit depending on the university partner. They have a little bit of flexibility, but I have kind of set a floor that it shouldn't go below. And it's a 10-week program. It operates in the summer, kind of bracketed by the end of the spring semester and the beginning of the fall semester. The absolute starting and ending dates, and whether it's a hybrid schedule or an in-person schedule or a remote schedule, that kind of varies by the host agency, and that's kind of left up to the host agency contact and the selected fellow. Before the fellows begin their work, I try to provide them with a little bit of an orientation that discusses ethics, discusses communication, basic government structure, and then, you know, the clear message that they are to serve as nonpartisan science policy staff in whatever state agency they've been placed in. In terms of the selection process, how it works, the fellowships are awarded to qualified applicants, quote unquote, that are focused on improving the interface between science and policy development. We do ask the applicants to speak to that focus of theirs. We want applicants that have a drive and a desire to be engaged at that interface. They have to be an MS or a PhD student at a partner university. And so, you know, a grad student at, for example, Notre Dame is going to be paid by Notre Dame. And so we can't, at this point, with no other sources of funding, we can't just accept applicants from any institution. A lot of the, you know, advertising and the outreach and the collection of applications is actually conducted by the individual partner institutions. So I have developed good relationships with either deans or provosts at our partner institutions, and they're the ones that actually collect the applicant materials. And then the university actually goes through the initial vetting process, and whatever their applicant pool is, they are charged with reducing that pool to 3 finalists, which are then forwarded to me and farmed out to my fellowship advisory committee, and I'll talk a little bit about that here in just a minute. The faculty or the fellowship advisory committee selects 1 finalist from each pool of 3, and we try to get that done by early March, or through March, and then, by early April, we provide the selected fellow material to the host office, to which they're going to be assigned, and we give the applicants an opportunity to kind of rank their preferences for which host office they work in. Host offices have the final say as to whether they accept or decline a selected fellow, and we have not yet in our 2 years had a decline of a fellow. The idea is if a fellow is declined, that will then hopefully go to a second preference or a third preference host office. I host multiple Zoom information sessions about the fellowship during the application period. That's typically in November and December. And then I'm gearing up here in about a week and a half to conduct an orientation training session after the fellows have been connected with their host office. That's kind of what I'm in the thick of right now. Again, just to kind of give some details on how we do it. We've developed an agreement form for our university partners, for our host offices, as well as our selected fellows that all need to get signed. Those agreement forms went through a pretty detailed back and forth development and editing process with all of the stakeholders. And that most of that was last year. And in fact, this year, all of these agreement forms went through and got signed without any sort of a hitch. And so that was obviously very nice to have that done. Just to kind of real quick summarize our fellows from last year. Like I said, we had placed 3, including Andrew Trowbridge, PhD candidate up in biochemistry at Notre Dame, and he worked with the Indiana State Department of Agriculture, working on soil carbon sequestration. Mr. Abdul El Naji, who is now Dr. El Naji, working out in Colorado, actually. He worked with Indiana Department of Natural Resources Division of Fish and Wildlife, and actually worked on an outstanding project, working on designing a sampling strategy for the state to follow with respect to avian influenza and waterfowl. And so looking at water contaminant gradients and how that might influence sampling of avian influenza. And we actually tried to press this up a little bit, with kind of the recent outbreak of zoonotic transmission of avian influenza to cattle and to humans. And so trying to make sure people see the efforts of the State Academy and the fellowship program. Mr. Rafael Alamia, PhD candidate at IUPUI, now IU Indianapolis. He worked with the Department of Education to address some legislative mandates about new science teaching standards, as well as kind of documenting status of computer science education. So those were our fellows that were placed last year. I think I want to kind of highlight this a little bit. I host an end of fellowship reception, essentially celebration, where we gather, invite stakeholders, and the fellows kind of report on what they did. And I made a point last year, so I've only done this once, did it last year, of inviting non-participants. I invited deans and provosts from other universities, and I invited representatives from state agencies that had not participated. And a few of them actually came, and it immediately generated growth. So after the Dean of IU Bloomington came to this event and he saw this, he literally emailed me within about 48 hours and said, we want to play. And that was also the case with representative from host agencies that had not participated last year. They also said, we would like to host a fellow if one is available. So this kind of if you get the word out, it at least in our case, generated measurable and beneficial interest. So this year, our participating universities include Notre Dame, Ball State, IU Indianapolis, and IU Bloomington. Our host offices, and you'll notice that Indiana Department of Environmental Management is kind of highlighted here in yellow with a star. I'm going to have to come back to that. But Department of Education, Department of Transportation, Natural Resources, and the State Department of Health have all had fellows placed for 2024. And so just real quick to kind of run through this is we reached out to these agencies to ask from them, what would your preferred field of study be? What would you hope they might work on? What can they provide if we are able to place a fellow? And so they all give a sense of who they would prefer, as well as what they envision the scope of work might be. I don't think I need to read through all of this, but this is Department of Transportation, Natural Resources. They're pretty broad. Obviously, the life sciences and earth and environmental sciences, but they're also willing to consider somebody from, the more liberal arts sciences, such as sociology. And that, I didn't mean that to sound like a potential insult. It wasn't, because they deal with a lot of visitor use data, for example, and so they could potentially use a fellow to address some of those social and cultural factors also. Department of Education, again, working on literacy initiatives and policy implementation as opposed to policy development. Department of Health, a whole bunch of public health initiatives, a lot of data analytics, and also just lead and healthy homes initiatives. So that's kind of the idea of what a fellow might work with that state agency. Just to give a shout out, these are our placed fellows for 2024. We placed a fellow from each of our partner institutions, and you'll notice that I've kind of got some stars here because one thing I do once they're placed is I request, actually I expect from each of the state agencies that they will provide me a one-pager with what is their intended work effort, what do they expect the deliverable to be from the Inspect Fellow during the course of the year. And that ultimately would just allow us to, not only for my reporting, but also potential press and outreach and that kind of stuff. And I'm still waiting for the host agencies to get me those one-pagers. So I think just to wrap it up here in terms of what I was just going to try to offer, I do receive a pretty darn modest stipend from the Academy as the Inspect Fellowship Director. I might have to ask for a raise at some point that I won't get because we don't have as many of you probably know, unlimited budget. The university partners pay the fellow stipend, and they also provide a small administration fee to the Academy. It's currently at $1,000. I basically use all of that to run the end of the fellowship celebration and the reception. I report to the Executive Council of the Academy, and so I did that, of course, as president, and then as past president, and now I'm doing it as the director of the fellowship program. Just to share a few problems and concerns that we're kind of identifying, and that is that there lots of times I need to work pretty hard at getting the host offices to communicate with me. it's always been successful, but it sometimes takes a lot of work. I told you I was going to come back to IDEM. This was actually a bit of a concern. They jumped in saying, yes, we want to be a host office. And they stayed with the program all the way through our fellow review. And then right before I was getting ready to send them the selected finalists, they backed out. And they said, well, we don't have anybody here that can serve as a mentor. And kind of oversee the fellow, but it really threw a cog in the wheel, and so I had to scurry to find a placement for the fellow that was going to be placed with IDEM, and so I'm going to have to design a strategy to deal with and address with, okay, what happens if somebody pulls out. Another issue is, Indiana's a long state, and we got somebody from Notre Dame, and we got me in Evansville. And so if I want to try to schedule a reception at the end of the summer, it's gonna be hard to find a time when people can travel. I'm 3.5 hours away from Indianapolis, and it's in a different time zone. So it's not a trivial matter for me to drive up, and it's not a trivial matter for somebody from Notre Dame to drive down. So I need to be aware of those limitations also. I think I just I'll close just by shouting out my fellowship advisory committee. When I reached out to the membership of the academy to ask for people to serve on this committee, I had a committee filled literally within hours. It really does feel to me, after discussing this program at our annual meeting, and then reaching out like this, the membership of the academy, as well as the executive council, is really hungry to be involved and to be engaged. There really seems to be no shortage of a recognition that, yeah, a state academy needs to be visible, and playing a role in decisions that involve science at a state level. And I, of course, agree 1,000%. So I think that's all I had in terms of kind of officially saying stuff. I hope that's what you're looking for.
That is terrific, Paul. Thank you so much. I know I have a bunch of questions, and I am going to hold those until after Sarah's presentation, and we'll just have all sorts of Q&A and discussion after Sarah's finished. So thank you so much. I'm so excited to hear that all from you as a neighbor, and I'm very inspired. So I will turn it over now to Sarah Brady from the California Council on Science and Technology. You all may notice that CCST is not a state academy of science, but Sarah, I hope you will start by giving us a little bit background about CCST and why you are part of this esteemed club of wonderful people.
Sure.
Thank you.
Happy to. So I'll share my screen here. I'll start by answering your question just immediately and directly, which is, when CCST was created back in 1988, the California Academy of Sciences already existed, but wasn't serving in the role that I think most of your academies serve in, and certainly not serving in the role that CCST serves in. So internally, we've always joked that we should have their name, but we don't. So that's why we're called the California Council on Science and Technology. But I think what I'll hopefully show you today is that in a lot of ways, we do operate like an academy, and also we're structured quite differently for various reasons. But I'm going to try to keep this brief so we have plenty of time for questions. So apologies if I skim over some things, but happy to elaborate more in questions. So like I said, we were created at the request of the legislature, actually, back in 1988. And it was a time when they were wrestling with a question about pesticides. And they basically had this wake-up call that they didn't have the easy access to scientists that they needed in order to feel confident in choosing a policy solution at that time. So they created CCST. So we're a 501c3 nonprofit. We exist to basically connect and collaborate with the impressive research and academic network that is in the state of California. So our goal is obviously to strengthen policy by making science and technology more accessible and understandable. So we really look at our role as amplifying and translating the knowledge that exists in the research and academic enterprise here in California. So to do what we do, we have to have these partnerships with our research network. So we actually get annual dues from all of the entities shown here on this slide. So they are formal partners with CCST, and we rely on them in order to have access to the right people and the right information to be responsive to policymakers. Currently, we do not have a standing body of experts. So that's a key difference between how other state academies are operated. So we're governed by a board of directors. We have 5 independent director seats. Otherwise, all of our directors are from these partner institutions. So for example, University of California gets 3 board seats, CSU gets 2 board seats, Caltech, Stanford, USC have 1 board seat. So that's how we ensure partner buy-in and participation in the governance of CCST. At one time, we did have a council that was, the council of the council that is the organization. And it was a wide range of experts, I think in some ways similar to how other states operate. And at that time, for CCST, there was a lot of confusion between the role of the council and the role of the board. And we just didn't have the staff capacity to truly staff the council in the way that we felt they needed to be staffed in order to be successful. So that was in 2018, we actually disbanded the council. And so for the last 6 years, we've essentially stood up steering committees or advisory committees of experts on particular topics as needed, whether that's energy or wildfire, or we're working on pesticides again now. So we have kind of created this flexibility to create the groups when we need them, but haven't had to maintain staff capacity for kind of an ongoing group of experts. And I think there are benefits and drawbacks to that I'm happy to chat about. Internally, we're considering bringing back a standing broader group of experts now. So, I think the landscape as it shifts, we just are constantly rethinking how we operate. So how do we do what we do? So we connect scientists directly with policymakers. So here, this is our board of directors and a group of scientists meeting with the former California EPA secretary and the California Natural Resources Agency secretary. We host expert briefings. Expert briefings are often a really important way for us to start work on an issue area before we have a contract or funding coming in on the issue area. It's a way to demonstrate why scientific expertise might be needed on an issue, and that often leads to contracts and funded work. We host full day workshops when a 1-hour briefing just isn't enough to really dig into a topic. And then we do peer-reviewed reports. Historically, the peer-reviewed reports were the bulk of the work that we did. And they're amazing for when it's a particularly controversial issue and the state really, really needs the deep, deep technical information. But something that, I've really worked on with our team here over the last 8 years is creating this broader range of science services so that we can be responsive on different timescales and at different costs. Because a peer-reviewed report, that takes 1 to 3 years to do. and policy conversations often move a lot more quickly than that. So we've really stood up these other options so that we can engage in these conversations more quickly, but still maintain the rigor of our work and protect CCST's reputation for providing trustworthy, credible scientific information. And then, of course, what we're here to talk about today is our CCST Science Fellows program. So our program is modeled after the AAAS federal program. We were the first state program. I'm an alum of the program. I was a fellow 11 years ago, and it has been a just deep privilege to now be able to work with all of the incoming fellows, to direct the program here at CCST, and to work closely with a lot of other states who have stood up programs or are currently thinking about standing them up. You know, from my perspective, from CCST's perspective, we need more programs, we need more fellowships. There's an interest and a need for this type of work, and no one program or state can fulfill that demand, right? And I think it's amazing to watch how different states can stand up the programs differently based on the needs of that state. So that's something that I've enjoyed learning about too, and working with the other states. So our program is a 1-year program. So you get a year of professional development and leadership training in the policy space. Fellows start November 1st and then go until October 31st. Thus far, we've had 172 fellows go through our program. I wanted to include this slide, what are we looking for? Because we very purposefully don't, or haven't historically, I'll say, this could shift in the coming years, but we haven't targeted specific expertise. And we don't align a fellow's training with the office that we place them in. So for example, I'm a chemist by training. I did my fellowship in a personal office for an assembly member where I worked on higher education, environment, energy, judiciary, elections. Like, I did a range of issues that had absolutely nothing to do with chemistry. So what we find is that it's really the personality and the fit of a fellow with the office that's most important, not the subject matter. That's what's been most successful for us. Here's a little bit more details about the program overall. So to be eligible, you have to have your PhD in hand before the start of the fellowship. So for fellows who are potentially joining us this coming year, we're just doing final interviews actually next week. They have to have completed their PhDs by September 15th. All fellows are CCST staff members now. That's a shift we made, I think, 4 years ago. Previously, our fellows were independent contractors. And so it was a really amazing opportunity that we had to be able to hire the fellows. It's a better financial situation for them. We provide benefits, paid time off, etc. And then a little bit there on application materials. So the current class of fellows serving is our 15th year. So it's kind of a big year for us. We're really excited about it. This is our current class. You'll see that this year we have placements in the state assembly, the state senate, and the executive branch. So for the first 10 years of the program, we only placed in the legislature. And then we were able to secure some state funding starting in year 11. So that's when we expanded to the executive branch. And since then, we were able to secure significant additional state funding after years of just relationship development and continuous demonstration by all of our fellows, the value that they bring to the state. The state matched money from the Moore Foundation to seed an endowment for the fellowship program. And the state is now the primary funder of that endowment fund, which if you had asked me 3 years ago if I thought that would be the situation, I never would have said that. And frankly, we got really lucky to have capitalized that endowment last year. The state is in a really bad budget year now this year. So we kind of got in under the wire there. So our funding situation is looking really fairly stable for us for the next many years, which we're really, really grateful for. And so, of course, now having 15 years of fellows, we have a growing and really active alumni network. So we have over 155 alumni. The vast majority of them stay in policy jobs, whether that's in Sacramento, in other places in California, in DC, of course, and other places. And what's been really, really amazing is that they continually give back to the program. So I think the program and the way we're able to train our fellows has continuously improved year after year, as alumni are just adding increased value to how we're able to train and recruit, frankly, new fellows. Oops, I went the wrong way. So just some numbers on our alumni. So 36% stay in official, like state government employment, 20% nonprofit or research, private industry or consulting. A lot of this first like big chunk before you get to academia over here, I would bucket all of this and even some of the trade association and the federal labs as policy broadly. So we still work fairly closely with a lot of these alumni, not just in the fellowship program, but more broadly in the work that CCST does. So that's something that I really wanted to make sure to hit home on, is that even though the fellowship program is the newest thing, if you will, that CCST does, it's now what we're best known for in policy circles in Sacramento. And that has really helped to increase the awareness of the other work that CCST does. And it's made policymakers more willing to invite us to the table. It's really humanized, if you will. It's really humanized, you know, scientists and science in the policy process here in Sacramento. So we have a lot more new partnership opportunities that come out of the fellowship program, whether it's with offices who start out by hosting a fellow and then they learn more about CCST and then they want to do an expert briefing with us, or they want to help us, you know, find funding for a workshop or something like that. And then as our alumni continue to stay in state government and in policy work, that's creating additional opportunities for CCST as well. So I think some of these broader impacts were certainly never the goal of the fellowship program, but it's been incredibly beneficial for CCST overall. So I'll stop there. My email is here, so happy to answer any questions now or in follow-up. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. That's terrific. And I love all the different ways that the divergences between these two programs we heard about, and how you all have, you know, taken kind of different paths, you know, different parallel paths along the same idea of the fellowships. So I'm so glad to have both of you to share those stories with us. I would like to open it up. I mean, selfishly, I'd like to ask the first question, but I would like to open it up to any of you with questions and comments. I know originally we had 2 hours scheduled for this, but since we had a speaker who then dropped off, we might not take the whole 2 hours, but I would love to kick off a discussion here if anybody wants to start with the first question.
Well, I will ask a question, I guess, if no one else wants to jump in. First, Sarah and Paul, congratulations. These are awesome. In Nebraska, this is something I just took over as the executive administrator in Nebraska about 7 months ago, but we don't have any sort of interaction whatsoever with our state legislature or policy. And this is something I've been wanting to try to figure out how we can dip into in Nebraska. I wrote down a series of questions, so I'll just start with one and let other people talk too. But Paul, for you, I was curious. You mentioned that you sort of have parameters that you suggest to the institutions in terms of the stipend. Are you willing to share like what those are?
Yeah, sure. We say, well, it's a 10-week program. And so I suggest that 10,000 is a good stipend, but we say no less than 8,500.
Thank you.
And I think the actual range is 85 to 11.
Okay.
But it it's owned by the partner university.
And how did you determine like which, did you just kind of just go fishing and just start contacting your institutions and to see who would be interested in that? And did you I mean, how did you broach this with them to get the ones that you have? And I heard you say that others are now interested and they want to play too, but how did you get it going, I guess?
Well, Notre Dame was already on board 4 years ago because this initiative was in Indiana. The ball was started rolling by these PhD students at Notre Dame. So, when you got something in your pocket, it makes it a little bit easier than to go to another institution. And so they had also started communicating with the dean of the graduate school at IUPUI, again now IU Indianapolis. They had started communications with a provost at Ball State. I finished those conversations and fortunately finished them successfully. And then that was all we had last year were those three. Getting ready for the reception, I tried to invite Purdue, Indiana State, IU Bloomington, and IU Bloomington came. That was the only one that came to the reception. 48 hours later, they're now participating. And so now this year, I will go back to Purdue. I'll go back to Indiana State, University of Indianapolis. They have to be institutions that have graduate programs in the STEM disciplines. I've already started talking with Rose Holman because DOT wants engineers. Well, Rose Holman is largely undergrad, but they do have some masters. So that'll work. It's knocking on doors and trying to sell the benefits of the program. And because the universities are funding it, I think in my opinion, the strongest selling point is it's good for your students and it's good for your institution. You can write a press release about what your program and your students are doing for the state of Indiana.
Can I follow up on that? Like when you said you were knocking on doors, whose doors? Was it deans of specific schools? Was it career development offices? Like who ultimately decided to fund students from the different schools?
I start with the deans of the graduate school. That's what I start with. And at IU Bloomington, I got funneled over to the director of the graduate fellowships program. And so now she is my primary contact, but the dean is the one giving the money. And then at Ball State, I happen to be talking with the provost or an assistant provost. But I always start with the dean of the graduate school.
And I was wondering similarly, I mean, here's a cluster of questions about the origins of this program. I was wondering at what point did the academy come on board? Because I'm glad to hear about the students at Notre Dame. That seems like a key, element of success, but did they knock on your door and invite the academy to get involved? Or how did you all get roped into that? Notre Dame is probably one of your affiliated institutions, but what was that process?
It's funny. I don't remember precisely how it happened, but it was while I was president, and the instant I took those reins as president, I shined a light on my agenda, and that is this academy, and I'm exaggerating a little bit here. This academy sucks because we don't do anything. We don't engage ourselves in our state. We highlight that we're one of the oldest state academies in the nation and we have all this wonderful stuff, but we're not doing anything with respect to the state of Indiana other than hosting a meeting. And so I'm old enough and close enough to retirement in my career that I don't care about blowback, and so I kind of let them have it. And son of a gun at the executive council didn't agree.
Hmm.
And somehow or another that noise got out, and the students at Notre Dame heard that, wait, there's a president at the academy that's advocating for engagement in policy and state level decision making, and that kind of stuff. And so we just hooked up. And then I took the ball because they were PhD students, they're moving on. And they wanted somebody else to take it. And I said, I'll take it. And I went to the executive council and said, you have to do this. You have to participate. It's what a state academy should do. And son of a gun, if they didn't say okay.
That's great. I mean, that's sort of like the ideal, like if they bring it to you on a platter, I mean, not that it's fully finished there, but like I've been going to the monthly STPF calls and saying to those kinds of graduate students who are organizing in their different states and universities, I've been saying to them, like, please contact your state academy. There might be somebody there who could support this program. And I'm not saying that necessarily, maybe we don't know that that's what happened, but like that's encouraging. You know, it encourages me as a, ambassador from the National Association of Academies to go on and make sure we're always trying to make those connections, because, sometimes you're going to hit somebody who's in the right position with those resources. So thank you for that.
Just to follow up, and Sarah, you can tell me to shut up if you've got something to say. I actually hosted the March for Science in Evansville a number of years ago, and I feel really strongly about this. I feel very strongly about this, that science needs to kind of stand up a little bit and yell nicely, and we need to shine a light on what's being done that helps humanity. And it's more important now, in my opinion, than ever it's been in my career. The problem is state academies of science don't get academics tenure. And I know that.
Yeah.
Engagement in a state academy is not going to get an assistant professor tenure at an institution.
Yeah.
Well, okay, my position then is tough, work harder. If you're going to be in a state academy of science, then you ought to be in a state academy of science.
It definitely attracts people who give a hoot. So I'll vouch for that. Yeah. Dan, go ahead. I see your hand is raised, and Hallie, you had your hand raised too.
Yeah, Hallie, do you want to go first? My question's off topic and your hand was up first.
Mine is, I just wanted to really quickly kind of connect a dot really quick that I've heard before from other academies and from other STPF or starting STPF programs is related to engaging institutions, especially, the bigger universities, research universities in your state can often be challenging. And it sounds like Paul, you in Indiana, and Sarah, you and CCST in California have had a lot of luck doing that, or I guess hard work more than luck. It looks like luck because we don't know how you did it. So I was curious too, Sarah, if you could talk a little bit about how some of those partnerships with universities came to be for CCST, and then maybe some of us in other states that struggle with that could learn from you. And I know it's hard in some states, we don't have nearly as many doctoral granting institutions, so it's a bit of a different landscape, but that relationship development, I think, can be a challenge, and I would love to hear more on it. That may be a really big question.
It's an ongoing challenge, right? Because often our relationships are at the leadership level of these institutions. And when that changes, then we're kind of back to square one and like redeveloping relationships and stuff. So like the closeness of our relationship, for example, with the University of California system ebbs and flows, frankly, as leadership changes, as their priorities change, things like that. So partner engagement is something that we're constantly working on, especially because like one of the drawbacks of California having so many institutions is that it's just incredibly difficult to have all of the relationships be strong all at one time. Right. And, maybe we have really strong relationships with associate professors at one institution, but we're not yet connected to the president there, or maybe like we're really connected with the president and vice versa, right? But I'll say when it was initially started, the institutions came to the table sheerly out of political pressure. And CCST being created was actually an idea pushed by the University of California, because the original idea coming out of the legislature was that the legislature should get say, that the state should get say in the research agendas of these institutions. And as you can imagine, the institutions were like, no, thank you. But what we will agree to is this independent entity that can coordinate us and help us better align with the policy needs. Yeah.
I was gonna say, that's interesting. I was gonna hop it over to Dan.
Yeah, this question is more on topic, but I have an off-topic one if I can before I leave. I had put this on my calendar for just an hour. So so you might have said this in your presentation, but those partner universities, do they contribute funding to the fellowship program or support CCST more broadly? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, they support CCST more broadly. And I'll tell you that we expect our earnings from the endowment to fund 8 to 10 fellows. And right now we have 15 fellows per cohort. So one idea we have to fund the additional 5 to 7 fellows we want to keep having is to build a different type of funding partnership between us and some of our institutions, so that if we select a fellow from Stanford, maybe Stanford kicks in some funding for them. So
yeah, I've been curious about that model and have thought about it, like whether or not you could pitch to a university that they could support a fellow in the same way that professional societies support fellows in the AAAS program. But I don't know that their incentive is totally aligned, given that I don't know that they care a lot about what happens after they graduate so much as while they're there. So that's why I was curious, like, has anybody successfully made that case to a university? I've actually been meaning to reach out to the professional societies and be like, why do you do this? Yeah. I have a very off-topic question. I'm just curious because we have the state academies represented. Does anybody know why Massachusetts doesn't have a state academy of sciences? And how do these things form? And if this is too off topic, I can follow up at a different time.
No, I think this is totally on topic. That's why we are the academies that gather once a month to talk to each other. Massachusetts nominally does have an Academy of Science. There is an entity, as far as I know, that was legally incorporated. I think what happened was there's a Massachusetts Museum of Science or some entity like that, basically like subsumed the Academy of Science because it was about to die or something. And so I'm not sure the current legal status. It's not standing up as a separate identifiable entity, but it may have a legal incorporation. It may have a legal board of directors. I can't remember whether I've been doing a lot of snooping on people's 990, so they may or may not have a 990. Have to get back to me on that. But yes, there has been some inquiry among some of our members and contacts in Massachusetts about what the history of that was and whether there should be a Massachusetts Academy of Science, or whether those functions are being fulfilled by some other organization. Yeah, definitely it's something that we have on our radar. There are a few states where there isn't one that's like functioning. There are a few. So yeah, it's not a totally impertinent question.
Yeah, it's just always been very surprising to me. But I
because
also
there's a heck of a lot of science.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
In this process, have you found other institutions that are sort of playing that role?
In other states, do you mean?
No. In Massachusetts, you said.
Oh, I haven't done a ton of research,
Okay.
but you know what? I'd love to loop you into those conversations as we start, because AAAS is going to be in Massachusetts next year. And so normally we work with a local organization on the ground when we go there and join AAAS we do the junior academy there. And so likewise in Colorado, Kate, like we don't have a state Academy of Science. in Colorado. And so again, there's some challenges there. Like it's nice when we have a local, organization that we
Yeah.
can coordinate with. So
Awesome. Yes,
yeah.
please loop me in. Sorry to take
Yes.
on a tangent.
No, that's
But
wonderful. Thank you. I'm so
yeah.
glad to make contact. I'd love to loop you in.
Yeah, cool. Good to see everyone. I have to run. Bye.
Yes, Carrie, go ahead.
Yeah, so this one is for Sarah. Sarah, are you you said you were a 501c3. This is sort of on topic of what actually we were just talking about. I recently discovered that our academy is a private foundation. Is that how you are also classified?
We're a nonprofit. I'm not sure about the legality of the term of private foundation.
So what I've learned about we're classified as 501c3, but because most of our money that we operate on is through an endowment, we're classified just a little bit differently than a normal 501c3. And the reason I was curious about that is because Amanda was good enough to share this video with me about lobbying and stuff like that. And so there are things that private foundations cannot do that the normal 501c3s can do. And so if we're trying to start this program, I was just wondering if anybody had ever had, Paul or Sarah, any issues with anybody coming back at you about lobbying. I mean, I know it's sort of tricky in some states when you're putting together position papers, or as you called them, peer-reviewed reports, which I also would like to get into. You know, if that gets sticky in any way, or you know, I guess that's my question.
It for sure gets sticky. We can't lobby. I mean, I think we can lobby up to 10% of our total budget, basically. But we basically say we don't lobby, and we're very, very careful about that, right? We inform and we make our information available to every single policymaker. So I am happy to meet with anybody on any end of the spectrum politically, right? And we're very careful in how we share the information. So in our peer-reviewed reports, for example, we provide recommendations, but we don't say like, this code should be amended to blah, 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 right? We say the Public Utilities Commission should consider whether this change would benefit blah, 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 like, right? So we're clear to put the decisional power in the hands of the policymakers. We did have a lot of questions at the outset of the fellowship program about lobbying and such, and how we handled that was a couple different ways. We have an MOU with the legislature, and we have an MOU with each executive branch agency who hosts a fellow. So it's a clear legal partnership. So they're essentially staff in these placements, right? So they're not lobbying because they are staff doing the same work that the office is doing. And then we also, before we started the program, we had to run a bill through the legislature to codify that science fellows were not gifts to the legislature. And then we just ran another bill last year to further clarify, after expansion to the executive branch, that they were not gifts to executive branch placements. Because, for example, in past years, we've placed fellows in the Department of Insurance because we have a deputy insurance commissioner on climate change. And the insurance commissioner is an elected position. So it created these questions again about whether fellows were a gift. So there were some kind of behind the scenes mechanisms we had to go through in order to make sure legally we were still in good standing.
And Paul, I agree with you that we do need to get more kind of out there. Have you experienced any issues in trying to break through? Just, you know, how have you talked with, you said you weren't in the House yet, but how have you, when you got into the governor's office, how did that go? Do you have any tips on how to or did you just get out there and get in there?
Yeah, we have not, I have not had any explicit direct communications with the governor. All of our interactions have been, I guess the highest up in an agency has been chief of staff. So it hasn't even been agency head. All of the agency directors that I've looked at and that we've been have agreements with are appointed, so they work at the pleasure of the governor. They're not elected. But like I said, all of these conversations have been with division chiefs or chief of staff. That's the level that we've been. And, you know, my vision, which would be for the next fellowship director, probably, is that we might be able to enlarge and get into the State House, but that's going to demand some more funding because we would need to have a longer than a 10-week fellowship that only happens in the summer. And, you know, for now, we're going to cross that bridge when we get to it. But I think in the meantime, what I'm trying to do is to build up a program legacy so that I can leverage the agency heads to speak to the benefits of this fellowship program, because I think that would sell it a lot better than me. In other words, if I have the division chief from Fish and Wildlife going over to the State House and saying, you know, this Inspect Fellowship program has helped us implement policy that's being developed in the state in an efficient, sustainable, productive manner, it could serve the legislature well too. That's going to do more than me walking in and cold knocking on a door saying, hey, you should use our scientists.
So how did you pick your departments?
Well, now, again, I've only got like 2 active years under my belt.
Yeah.
And so I'm picking whatever door I can find with a crack in it. Okay. And so, you know, for example, when I pulled IDEM in, they were nowhere near our program. I used connections I have on LinkedIn to get over and find the chief of staff. And I got to admit, it was very productive. It was very enthusiastic. It was very positive. And then they pulled out at the last minute. And, you know, that was kind of a burst balloon. But it worked. It worked to get them on board. And so, you know, once this cohort is placed and working, you know, I'm going to go back to that executive branch structure and find out, okay, which agency should I go track down now, you know? So I hope I answered your question.
I have a question for both of you. This is something that I've been ruminating on a lot in the last couple of years, because Kentucky, you know, I think nobody would argue, like we're a brain drain state. So when we started considering, you know, the possibility of launching a fellowship, you know, as early as 2021, we started thinking about this internally. You know, with our limited resources, we just could not conceive of launching a fellowship where you have to train and supervise, do all the placement, the legwork every single year, like Paul is doing. There's no way we can do that with our limited resources. And then to train a person, there wouldn't necessarily be a path for them to stay in the state. Like California has so many options for those people who are staying in Sacramento, whatever. I'm wondering what your thoughts. So what we ended up doing was we hired a person part-time, but we hired a person with our limited resources who we got really lucky, to be a policy person who worked on our staff. And we have a new person now who's that new person. So that was our alternative instead of doing a fellowship, to still build our capacity to do policy work. And I wonder if either of you have thoughts on the fellowship model, which has been like well promulgating now throughout states, versus an Academy of Science making an investment in a staff person who could be there to serve some of those functions. And maybe like CCST has some of both of that kind of. But I wonder if both of you have thought about this, or what your thoughts would be, to the whole diversity of states and organizations that we are.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Sure. Great questions. The first thing that comes to mind is that there's just something different when the person, the fellow, is in the office, right? Like they're going to have different access, build a different level of trust than anybody who's on the outside. So like my team internally at CCST will never have that same type of access that a fellow has in their office. And at the same time, of course, I believe that our internal staff are also providing a really important function. So I think that having staff at academies should happen. I think that I'm, on the same page as Paul, and that I think that it's a missed opportunity if academies are not engaging in policy, right? There's just so much enmeshment between, the sciences and research and societal impacts and policy decisions that are happening. And I guess I would say, I think the benefit that internal staff can provide to offices is just that additional capacity that they often don't have. Even in states where there are fellowships, we can't place a fellow in every office, right? So having staff at CCST who can provide some additional thinking when needed does provide a lot of value. And then I guess, I would toss it over to Paul, because perhaps, the Indiana model, where it's a shorter fellowship, might be something that could be more feasible in Kentucky versus the California model. And even, other programs such as the one I think that Dan runs at Harvard, right? I think is current students, right? So similar to Indiana, that's just another way to think about it, I think. I'll stop there.
And yeah, effectively, I am a staff member of the Academy. But admittedly, a lot of this effort is not compensated. I don't get a big stipend.
Right.
But I get enough of one that it's going to help me head into retirement. And it shows me that the Academy was ready to actually commit, that the Executive Council believes in this effort. And to jump off something Sarah said, and I agree with you 1,000%, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit here. There's a lot of room to make something happen with not a required huge amount of investment. And so I get a little stipend, and one could argue that it's largely being spent to fundraise with the university partners for them to pay a fellow. So you pay the fellow. I'll administer the program. I'll arrange the training. I'll give the info sessions. I'll find the host offices. I'll do those communications. You pay your fellow, and there's going to be a light shined on your university because of that. And at least for a couple of years, that has worked successfully. So we have this program in Indiana, and I want to call it a success, but it's only been 2 years. So it's getting successful. And it's really with not much money being spent by the academy.
Mhm.
Really.
Yeah.
So.
That's great. I love both of those ways of thinking about it. Thank you. Anybody else have questions? Any other discussion? All right, well, wonderful. I'm so glad for this conversation today. We will make the recording available on our website. So if you have people that you wish had been here today, please share it with them. And we'll see you for future Academy chats. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a great weekend. Oh, Paul?
Well, no, Sarah was a lot better than me and actually provided her email address. I didn't do
Oh,
that.
yes.
But I'm happy if anybody wants to chat about anything. I'm more than happy to do that.
Excellent. And I'm sure you are not hard to find, but I'll also share your contact information when I share the recording with folks. I'll send it out to everybody who registered and we'll put your contact information in there. So thank you. That's very gracious.
Of course.
All right. Great conversation today, everybody. Thank you so much.
Good to see everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.